Hello, my amazing students. Um, if you can believe it, we have made it to week 12. And what an adventure it has been. Um, as always, thank you so much for being on this journey with me. Every week, it's so fun to see your contributions and to just hear about what you're learning and what you're implementing in your life, and just to hear your stories. So thank you. Thank you for sharing those, and thank you for being engaged in the course. It is a joy. Also, congratulations on completing exam 2. That is a big milestone. Most of you did well, so congratulations. For those of you who didn't do as well as you had hoped, there is the extra credit assignment that is available until tomorrow, end of day. So please take advantage of that. We have very few weeks left, so we're kind of coming into the home stretch. So yeah, let's do what we need to do to finish strong. And with all of that acknowledged, why don't we hop into chapter 11? I will tell you, chapter 11, 12, 13, some of my favorite chapters. We're starting to really get into the meat of what I do on a day-to-day basis in my private practice as a psychotherapist. Today specifically, we're going to be talking about theories of personality, which is really fascinating to me, and hopefully it will be for you as well. The book says that our personalities are the unique way in which we each kind of individually think, act, and feel. This is a combination of temperament and personal experiences. The book does caution us that though personality is related to character and temperament, these are all kind of unique different parts as well. And they all contribute differently to our development and how we exist in the world. So, there's a lot of review in this chapter. I'm guessing if you are someone who has been faithful to your reading and to taking notes and to watching videos, there are going to be a lot of names that are very familiar to you, and a lot of review. Like I said, many familiar characters from previous chapters. One of maybe the most recognizable characters is Sigmund Freud. And so here he is popping up as we talk about personality. And as you might have already guessed, he is going to be considering personality from a psychoanalytic, psychodynamic perspective, which means that he's going to focus on the role of the unconscious. We probably could have all said that together if we were in a classroom setting. But again, that is really Freud's take on most things. And so here again, we see Freud kind of saying, personality is shaped by the unconscious. And he contributed a lot about what he thought the unconscious had to do with kind of personality development and how that all worked. Specifically, he proposed that the personality was divided into these three kind of distinct parts. And if you're taking notes, this is really important, both for this course, but also just in general. He talked about the id, the ego, and the superego. And some of you may already be familiar with this terminology. This is pretty common knowledge, especially when we're talking about psychology. And so just to go into a little bit more detail, the id is the part of our personality that is mostly driven by the unconscious. This is a lot of impulse, and most of that impulse is about pleasure seeking. And so, how fun, but also the id can get us into a little bit of trouble. Because it is driven by the unconscious and because its main goal is pleasure, it needs to be mediated a bit. And so that's where the ego comes in. The ego is this rational, logical, conscientious part of our personality, which kind of serves as that mediator for the id to make sure that pleasure seeking does not, kind of cause us to go awry, if you will. And then Freud also identified something that he called the superego. And the superego is our moral center. This is our conscience. And so this was kind of a big deal. These distinct parts of the personality. And to this day, this is a really big part of the field when we talk about personality and personality development. I think if we were going to kind of understand this maybe as a characterization, I think most of us maybe in a book, magazine, movie, have seen this example of a character and they're kind of in this, place where they need to make a decision. And the decision is to go have fun and, come what may, or the decision is to do, kind of the right thing. And so, as you can imagine, we've got, the devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other shoulder, the devil being the id, who just wants to have fun and seek pleasure, and the superego, being that moral part of us that says, hey, hold on a minute, right? Let's consider the moral implications of that decision. And then, kind of right in the middle, the character themselves, that's kind of the ego, okay? So that's a really simple example, but I think it's a good way to kind of remember those different parts of the personality. The angel, the devil, and the character themselves. The book goes on to talk about the behavioral perspective. So we have Freud's psychodynamic, psychoanalytic perspective in regards to personality, and then we have the behavioral perspective. And from previous chapters, we kind of know the main players involved in behaviorism. Those would be a lot of the same players that would contribute to this perspective on personality development. But at its core, the behavioral perspective, as I'm sure you could guess by now, focuses on the environment. It focuses on, our learned responses and behaviors. And so behaviorism would ultimately say personality is nothing more than what we've learned to do over time. Again, going back to that positive and negative reinforcement. And so, right, behaviorism would say that's how our personalities are shaped. The humanistic perspective, and Mr. Carl Rogers, which some of you know by now is one of my favorites, they would say, again, as you would probably guess, that personality is shaped much more by our conscious decisions and by our choices. And so personality development is about personal choices, and our personalities develop depending on the choices that we make. And so, again, I doubt that any of those perspectives are shocking to you because we have reviewed them before. But obviously now we're talking about them within the context of personality. So I want to spend a little bit of time on something that I find incredibly fascinating. And as a therapist, this is just kind of, personality gold, if you will. And I'm talking about psychological defense mechanisms. And Freud, kind of proposed that these mechanisms were a way for us to manage the conflict that's happening between the different parts of our personality. Again, that's the id, the ego, and the superego. And so as these different parts of our personality are trying to work together, conflicts arise. And so we have these defense mechanisms, which are our way to try to resolve those conflicts. And so I'm going to go through them rather quickly. If you're taking notes, I think this is stuff worth knowing. And so let's start with denial. Most of us have probably heard of denial. Denial is really just a refusal to acknowledge a situation. So something happens, or we do something that we shouldn't do, or something comes to our awareness that we really don't want to deal with, and so we just shove it aside, and we just deny that it's happening. And so denial, I mean, I feel like that's a pretty simple concept to understand. If we don't want to deal with something, then we just push it aside. If information is inconvenient for our worldview, then we just deny that it's happening. In the world right now, if we're paying attention, I think we're probably experiencing quite a bit of that happening around us and maybe happening within us. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. As with all of these defense mechanisms, there are implications long term. Next, Freud talked about repression. And repression, similar to denial, is just pushing undesirable thoughts out of our consciousness. So if we don't like what we're thinking, what we're experiencing, what we're being confronted with, then we'll just shove that down. Maybe some of you have heard the word stuffing. Like all this stuff is happening and I don't want to deal with it, so I'm just gonna stuff it on down, right? So that's repression. Repression is I can't deal with this thing, and so I'm gonna push it out of my consciousness. Now, obviously, when you repress things, they don't go away. You have shoved them down, and now they will inevitably come out in some other way that's probably less desirable. So, you got to keep an eye on that repression. Next, we have rationalization, and this is pretty self-explanatory. This is just when we make excuses for wrong behaviors. So our id acts out, does something that we shouldn't do, something that maybe we feel ashamed of, or at least something we don't want to admit to, and so we make an excuse for the behavior. And I'm sure at some point all of us have found ourselves in a spot of trying to rationalize something that we really knew was wrong, but we did it. And instead of taking responsibility and apologizing and trying to make it right, we'd rather try to make an excuse. I would call that an immature defense mechanism. Next, we have projection. And you may have heard of this as well. Projection is basically when we take unacceptable thoughts that we're having and we just put them on someone else. It's kind of like a hot potato, so I have something, in my hands. It's an unacceptable thought. I don't like it, so I just project it onto somebody else. And obviously, that is problematic. Next, we have reaction formation. And reaction formation is interesting. All of these are interesting, but this one's particularly interesting because this is where we create a really strong, overt emotional reaction to cover up our unacceptable real thoughts. So there's something going on within us that we're not ready to accept. Usually there's a fear component to this or a shame component to this. And so what we do, instead of sitting with that and resolving it and accepting it, is that we put out into this world a really strong negative emotional reaction to that thing. There are many, many examples that I could give. I'm going to choose to give a silly one just to kind of prove the point without it being too heavy. But let's say that I really, really, really love a McDonald's Big Mac. But I live in a community where fast food is a no-no, right? So I have a lot of shame every time I go through that McDonald's drive-thru to get that Big Mac. I have like all this shame, and I just have on my sunglasses. I hope no one sees me because in the community, I put out into the world that fast food is bad. It's ruining our society. It's creating an obesity issue. It's wrong. And yet once a week, there I am going to get my Big Mac. So instead of either living congruent and not eating Big Macs, or just saying, you know what, as a general rule, I don't know that fast food's the greatest, but I do love me a Big Mac, right? Living authentically. Instead of doing that, we allow the shame to cause us to have this reaction formation. And there's a lot of really unfortunate ways that this can play out. Obviously, best case scenario is that we work through those emotions, thoughts that are happening within us, and find our way to acceptance and resolution. Okay. Next, we have what Freud called displacement. And displacement is expressing negative feelings on a less threatening target, because the actual target of our negative feelings would be too threatening. And so a really simple example of this is we are having a really difficult relationship with our boss. He's a jerk. And every day he does things to make us feel small and insignificant. He undermines our work, and we are angry. But we don't feel like we're able to have an honest conversation with our boss for fear of retaliation, maybe losing our job. And so instead what we do is we bottle it up and we take it home. And then our partner or our children or our friends get an anger walloping that they did not deserve or anticipate over something completely arbitrary. And so obviously displacement, right? I think we've all been there, and yet it's another thing to keep an eye on. Next, we have regression. And regression, simply put, is falling back into childish coping mechanisms. So something happens, we have a tantrum, and we realize in that moment that whatever is happening in that situation has caused us to regress into responding in a way that is completely not age appropriate. Identification is trying to become like someone else to alleviate our discomfort or anxiety. Within the field, we call this kind of like wearing masks. So we pretend to be like everybody else or to be like someone specific because we're not sure that our real self is enough. Or we feel uncomfortable in a situation. We've talked a little bit about this in previous chapters. So next we have compensation. And compensation is trying to be superior in some area because we feel inferior in another area. And so we're trying to make up for a perceived deficit. And so if we're feeling insecure about a lack of professional success, then maybe we start throwing ourselves into these like rigorous workouts, because if I can't get the promotion, at least I'll be the strongest person at the table, right? And so compensation is about trying to make up for perceived insufficiencies. Next we have sublimation. Sublimation is really interesting. This is where we try to turn something socially unacceptable into something acceptable or helpful. And one, again, kind of silly example, I think of Taylor Swift, right? She's had all of these like horrible, heartbreaking breakups. And so she takes these terrible situations and she turns them into $1 million songs, right? So she's turning this heartbreak situation into a venue for making money and potentially also normalizing other people who are going through breakup scenarios. So that is a very quick overview of defense mechanisms. Again, I would spend some more time with those. I can't think of one of those that I haven't experienced at some point in my own life. I'm guessing some of them probably were familiar to you as well. And so, as with a lot of things that we discuss, these going through these and bringing awareness is not about shame, inducing shame. It's really about giving us an opportunity to make changes if we realize that we need to, or at least in a situation to stop and go, oh, I realize what I'm doing there. And then I have a choice to make. And awareness, that's what I love about talking through these things, is that there's an awareness that I didn't have before. And with an awareness comes an opportunity to change. And so there's your challenge. If you have experienced any of these defense mechanisms personally, or if you've witnessed any of them, share in the comments. Tell me a little bit more about that. And what your experience has been with defense mechanisms. Freud also talks about personality development in regards to the oral, anal, phallic, genital stages. And most of these are really about concerns of getting stuck in one of these stages, and then the implications as you continue your development without resolving these certain stages, and how that can in fact impact your personality. Adler also had a lot of interesting things to contribute about birth order, and so I'm not going to spend time on that, but some people are very fascinated by that, and I definitely think it's interesting, and there can be some truth to that, though it's certainly not everyone's experience. We also had Rogers talking a bit more specifically about self-concept, about the real self and the ideal self, the real self being who we really are, and that ideal self being who we wish we were. And, kind of this conflict about that occurs when we are presenting our ideal self instead of our real self. And Rogers points out the obvious, which is we are the most healthy. And I would add, we have the most healthy relationships when our ideal self and our real self are the same, or at least similar, and we're living congruent with who we really are. Rogers also talks about, the importance of unconditional positive regard, affection, and respect with no strings attached, and how important this is for us to fully explore who we are and to reach our potential. Within the context of a private practice, unconditional positive regard is like the foundation for all the work that we do as therapists. People have to feel like they have a safe space where they can share their stories without judgment, and where they have room to explore and to heal. And so that's a really important concept, both within the context of personality development, but also within the field of psychology, specifically within practicing psychology. He also talks about fully functioning people, and this is kind of similar to self-actualized people. These are those who are in touch with their feelings. They have awareness of their strengths and weaknesses. Because they've done their work, they can trust their instincts. Again, this is a person who has probably met all of Maslow's, hierarchy of needs. They've kind of checked those boxes. It takes a lot of work to be a fully functioning person. So that is a worthy goal for all of us. I did think it was interesting. The book talked about traits that make up personality. And as they talk about the 18,000, to the 200, to the 16, to the big five. And the big five, as you know from your reading, is, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so those who kind of prescribe to this big five theory of personality would say those are kind of the five core parts of our personality. And we all are probably, there's a spectrum of openness, a spectrum of conscientiousness, a spectrum of extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. And depending on who we are all at different places on that spectrum. The book also talks about personality types. And as you may already know, this is our discussion topic for this week. And so it identifies two main types, which is the type A and the type B. And these are probably ones that you've heard of before. Type A tends to be competitive, incredibly ambitious, but also easily annoyed, irritated. They have difficulty slowing down. They often run over people to get to where they want to be. And then we've got the type B, which is kind of the other end of the spectrum, right? These people tend to be easygoing. They're relaxed. They're slow to anger. They're taking their time. Not much gets to them. So the book also talks about a type C and a type H. The type C being someone who's pleasant. They're peacekeepers. They're really easy to be around, but they have difficulty being authentic, being assertive, expressing their genuine emotions. And then the book also talks about a type H, which is a type A without the negative implications, meaning the type A usually is high-strung. They usually, like I said, get easily annoyed, they're easily irritated, they're on edge. A type H is high achieving, ambitious, competitive, but without that kind of high-strung, anxious part. They thrive on the success, on the ambition, on the pace. So as you are contributing to the discussion board, I do want to please invite you to think about really which type you are. I see a lot of people have a tendency to want to say that they're a type A and type B. You're not. You are, there is more of you that is one or the other. Right? So either you tend towards being competitive, ambitious, and having difficulty slowing down, and that's the majority of you, but sometimes you can be relaxed in certain situations, or you tend to be easygoing, relaxed, slow to anger, chill, but you also have some drive, and you also can be successful. So as you are contributing to the discussion board, choose one. Even if you have some of the traits of the other, chances are one of these describes you much more accurately than the other. So take some time to really think about which one of those you are. I wanted for a minute to give you the lemon example because I think it is an interesting example of how these personality types kind of, work in real life. So the lemon example is someone gives you a lemon. A type A gets mad and throws the lemon back at you. Because why are you wasting my time with a lemon? I got stuff to do, right? The type B just makes some lemonade. That's awesome. I love a lemon. I'm going to go in the kitchen, make some lemonade. You want some? I could share. Okay. The type C pretends that they like lemons. Oh, thank you. I love a lemon. But really, they don't want your lemon. But they're not going to tell you because they're a peacekeeper and they don't know how to express their emotions, right? I laugh, but I've been in the struggle. Type H will make the lemonade and then they'll sell it. They'll make money. and then they'll make a lemonade franchise. Okay? So those are not perfect examples, but it just kind of puts it into some context that might be a little bit easier to understand. So think about that. When you are thinking about your personality type, what do you do with a lemon, right? Who are you? Who are you really? Not your ideal self, but your real self. Give it to us. Finally, this is a little bit long. This video is a little bit long. I love this chapter. That's probably part of the reason why I think it's important information to have. But let's just spend 2 minutes on personality assessments because I love a personality assessment. I love a personality assessment for myself. I'm always trying to take one and find out new information. And I also love them for clients as well. They're very helpful, especially when people take them honestly and can answer questions according to their real self and not their ideal self, and sometimes that can be hard. But let's run through them really quick. So a behaviorist would say that the best assessment for personality would be direct observation, rating scales, client interviews. A behaviorist wants that kind of tangible research, right? A trait theorist would say that the best assessment for personality is a personality inventory. So this would be an MMPI, this would be a Myers-Briggs, and to be perfectly honest, Myers-Briggs is like my favorite assessment. If you've never taken a Myers-Briggs assessment, you should. It's really interesting. The main components are extroversion versus introversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. Again, really interesting. And then we have the psychoanalyst who would say the best assessment for personality is a projective test. I am not a psychoanalyst, but I love a projective test. If you're not familiar with a projective test, this is a Rorschach, which is the ink blot test. So fascinating. And this is also what we call a thematic apperception test. And both of these are just really interesting because what you're having people essentially do is look at this image, which really means nothing, and their unconscious will project onto the test what is going on for them internally. It's fascinating. And so that is just a brief overview of personality assessments. As you may already know, if you've looked at your Week 12 course content folder, you have a personality test to take this week. Hopefully that will be fun. I look forward to hearing your feedback about how accurate you think that is, what you could kind of take away from that. And so, yeah, have fun with that. And I look forward to hearing about that experience. So that is a quick run through of chapter 11. Again, one of my favorites. Well, I love every chapter, but I really do love this chapter. Spend some time on it. And as always, just a reminder to do your reading, to take notes, to use this class as an opportunity to learn and grow as a human. I feel like there's so much here that you can take away with you just to be a better person, to be a better partner, to be a better parent, to be a better colleague, to be a better friend. So yeah, take this opportunity to learn and grow, make time for that. Also, I know we're getting towards the end. People start to disengage. Please don't. Please stay engaged until the end. These last few chapters are some of the best chapters that we will do, some of the best assignments that we will do. So please stay with me and end strong. I want you all to do well in this class. Please end strong. As always, if you need anything from me, email me. That's the best way to get in touch with me. And I will look forward to hearing your feedback on this video. And engaging more soon. So take care and have a great week. All right, bye-bye.